Hey guys, welcome back to Second Time Around. I'm James, and today we've got a really interesting one on the bench. This is a vintage Zenith. This is powered by the Zenith Calibre 2542. It's a manual wind movement produced during the 60s. And as you can see, the seconds hand has come off, which is rather a concern. We can't wind this watch up due to the fact that it could further damage the dial. £45. That's all I paid for this vintage Zenith on Facebook Marketplace. And when I opened it up, it was spectacular to say the least. You know, that's what I look for in these things, is getting them open and looking on the inside, the parts that the owner doesn't get to see. This has definitely seen better days, but we're really going to try and get in there and see how it's going. The ball doesn't seem to work for this. It's very tightly pressed on. Okay, I think we're going to have to resort to a different method here. So on the case back, it has these sort of grooves which allow you to use a tool like this one to get in there and really rotate it and use some force to get this off. I've put a different angle here so you can really see. I'm going to get in those grooves and rotate, and it should just come right off. Like so. There we are. I would normally put this on the timographer, but due to that seconds hand laying on the dial, it's just not proportionate. You know, there's a chance that it could damage the dial, and we really want to get those hands off prior to checking that the movement is working. Okay, so let's see if we can get this case back off here and see the movement inside. Wow. Just wow. I mean, that's impressive. What a stunning movement. Zenith are a big brand. They've really earned a name for themselves over the year. A bit of history just for you. Prior to Rolex using their own Daytona chronograph movement, Zenith actually made them, and they're highly collectible now to have a pre-Rolex Daytona movement that is powered by a Zenith Calibre. We're just going to get the crown stem out of this right now so we can remove this from the case. Okay, now we've got the crown stem out. We're going to have a look at that dial and see what we can do to get the hands off. That is the case back, you can see, Swiss made by Zenith. This is a parts container I use just to keep everything safe when I'm working on a movement, because, you know, these pieces are tiny and they do commonly fall and go missing. Okay, so we just had the crystal fall out then, so we're going to have a look under the microscope and see what sort of condition that is in. And surprisingly, it's pretty good. You know, I always keep the original crystals on these if I can. You know, it's part of the history, and that's what a collector would want, as opposed to replacing. But if they're in urgent need, then they absolutely will be. Okay, there we go. Of course, the second hand like to fly away from me, but we have it there. It is in perfectly good condition. And that was really the only safe way to get it out from under the other hands. You know, I can't rotate the other hands. You risk damaging the dial. There's a lot of factors at play here that we really do have to consider. Okay, so now we've got the seconds hand off, we're just going to pop this in this container. I use this container to hold the hands. It just keeps them safe from any damage while we continue our work. But now that they're off, we can check the movement and see how it's running without the risk of damaging the rest of the dial. And as you can see, we're just popping the crown stem in here, and we will take a look at the movement after giving it some winding. Okay, and there we have it. It is running. It looks to be running rather well. A tiny bit slow. Oh yeah, you can really see it's slowing down now. So we're going to pop that on the timograph and just see how that's getting on. Okay, so you can really see that result there. We've got what's called a snowstorm. The amplitude's low, the 518 seconds, you know, it's really bad. And that snowstorm means we're not really getting an accurate reading. So that just sort of shows as to why this really does need to be taken apart and completely restored. Recently, I've had quite a lot of inquiries via our website, which I will show you in this video. But, you know, a lot of people commonly will say, are you certified? Are you this, are you that? And absolutely, effectively how I got into this was I was in a role that I no longer liked. I felt like I reached my limits with it, and I was constantly looking to get out. And as a kid, I remember my grandfather was a watchmaker, but my father never took him up on that and never really took an interest in it. However, um, I found a journal, and that journal I'm self-taught from, as well as taking, courses and getting certified in servicing, etc. But I just want to emphasise you really don't need to go to some horology school to get into this and know what you're doing and learn. A lot of it is the bench work, and just because someone has a PowerPoint, it doesn't mean that they're going to be better than you could be by just putting in the time and effort. And yeah, those are sort of principles I live by. I heard a great quote once, which was, if you're going to miss the bus, miss it running. And I stand by that. I left something I wasn't enjoying to come and do something that is my passion and my dream, and I absolutely encourage anyone else to do that. If someone else can do this thing, then there's absolutely no reason as to why it cannot be you. So you just saw there we took the gasket off. Now the gasket stops the water from getting in, but it was extremely corroded and worn, and that's very common. It broke off in my tweezers, as you saw there. So we just let down the mainspring there to basically take out all the power of the watch while we disassemble this, because if you miss that part, there is every chance that it's going to sort of, when you take apart, they're going to fly off and go everywhere. Okay, so now we're on the dial side of the watch. We're just going to remove these hands and put them in the exact same pot that we put the other second hand in. And this will allow us to move on the dial side of the watch, get that dial off, look at the keyless works, the motion works, make sure there's nothing untoward under there, and really start the disassembly. So when it comes to a dial, it actually can be rather tricky. You can see on the outside of this dial there's a lot of wear and tear. And, you know, sometimes this can be cleaned and helped up, but sometimes it just cannot. A lot of these watches, the dial is the most frustrating part to tackle. I definitely tend to have a simple rule. I would try and get the dial looking as best as it can if there is some sort of corrosion or oxygenated parts like this has. But if I try very lightly and it's not working, the best practice is just to leave it alone. You're never really going to be able to get it perfect, and a collector would much rather have the original looking dial than something that you've created out of desperate fear to try and improve it. Okay, so now we've got the dial off, we can put that for safekeeping in one of these dial trays. We saw the motion works and keyless works there, and it looks to be all in order. But now we can really start this assembly. We've let down the mainspring now, so there is no power in the watch. So we're just going to start with removing the balance. I think for me, watchmaking is a thing that I absolutely love doing. It's very calming for me, and it can be satisfying to watch. I would hope for you guys to see. But I think it's spectacular. This was a trade, which back in the day, obviously trades were the main thing, that was handed down from father to son, and vice versa to others, etc. However, it's a dying trade. A lot of people now don't do this sort of work because it's not really a thing as much anymore. And I've even managed to notice a lot of places that advertise services of watch servicing, watch repairs, and they commonly outsource it to other places because it's just not possible anymore. You can see we moved the cannon pinion there, and that's the part that interacts with the minute wheel and the hour wheel. And the issue is with a lot of these places that say they do these things, absolutely they outsource them, but because there's not enough people doing them, you really don't know the quality of work you're getting. And this is why I love doing these videos, because you get some sort of transparency with what I'm doing. You can see as I'm going along with this. And as a collector, to have this sort of video with your watch, I mean, it's spectacular, really. And I've even heard stories of people travelling up and down the country trying to find someone to restore their watch. And again, I don't know whether these watches that they've been taking are super expensive, cheaper, sentimental, whatever it may be. But I've heard a lot of places refusing. They've travelled up and down the country and they cannot find someone to do it unless they are charging extraordinary prices. But this is sentimental to some people, and also I hate the idea of a task being refused to be completed when it's absolutely possible to be done. Okay, so getting back into things, we've obviously removed the balance now, and you can see I'm removing the pallet fork bridge. So this bridge underneath it is the pallet fork, and this has part on the back of it called the entry and exit stones, and they interact with the escape wheel, which then at the front of it will knock the balance left and right. Because under the balance is a small impulse jewel, and that is what it rotates with, and that's how the watch works. I mean, I commonly find it fascinating for how early pocket watches and wristlets, they used to be called back in the day, you know, how this was thought of and made, and with the lack of information back then that they had compared to what we have today, I just think it's amazing, and this sort of craftsmanship is so unique. I love being able to make these videos because you guys get to join me for the journey of restoring these. And this example we're using here today will be for sale. You are able to buy these restored in good conditions. And as you can see there on the actual plate of the watch, you can see the 2542 caliber marked there at the bottom. And this is the parts I get to see that, I really want a collector to be able to see. And that's why I think clear caseback should be mandatory on all watches, because realistically, seeing the movements inside is what really makes it special. Okay, so you can see here, we've just taken out the pallet fork there, and that obviously interacts with the train of wheels. So we've pretty much done the escapement of the watch, and now we're moving on to the train of wheels as well as the mainspring, ratchet wheel, and crown wheel. We do have many other platforms that you can view our content on, whether it's the short versions, the reels. We have TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and obviously this YouTube channel. And you're more than welcome to use those to watch any videos or drop us a message if you need to or feel like you want to. We also have a website, which I will show in this video, like I've already stated. And fortunately, recently, we've had quite a few great inquiries on there. People sending in horology requests, and we try to help as much as we can. If there's anything that we can fix and bring back to life, we absolutely will do. When you watch these videos, I would ask that you take things just with a pinch of salt, purely because, there's a lot of off-camera stuff that does happen. It's just not possible to record everything I do without, better camera equipment or all this sort of expensive stuff that we'd be using to capture it all, So for you watch heads out there who love watching this, I massively appreciate all the support. It goes further than you could ever imagine. If you do notice inconsistencies or something different or something you think, that's strange, I've heard that being done in a different method elsewhere, please do just take this with a grain of salt, that there are a lot of parts that are off camera that aren't seen. But that extends from, parts flying across the room and me going and getting them, right down to applying Loctite to the crown stem because, it needs a certain amount. Okay, so this part we just moved, there's the ratchet wheel, and the ratchet wheel actually sits on top of the mainspring barrel. And there we just pulled out the centre wheel. You can see how long that pinion is. It goes right down to the other side of the watch and therefore interacts with the hour wheel and the minute wheel and rotates the cannon pinion. This is quite indicative of a very vintage watch. A lot of these had these double wheels, so that longer wheel we just took off there, which was technically the centre wheel, goes through the other wheel you can see there in the centre. And this isn't done so much anymore, but back in these sort of days it absolutely was very common to find. Okay, so fantastic. So that is the mainspring barrel. You can see the gold colour of it, and the mainspring in there we will be having a look at. Due to the fact that this watch was running, it means the mainspring is working. We just have to see how well and how long it's really got left. This stuff sort of needs lubrication, and without that, there's a chance that the mainspring could snap. Okay, so moving on to the keyless works part now. Obviously, we disassembled the motion works earlier. These parts is, when you wind the watch, it's what interacts with your fingers. So when you pull it out to change the date, despite there being no date function on this watch, this is where you feel all those movements. People think that when you move the watch and you rotate it, it's the train of wheels that you feel. And it is to a degree, but this keyless works part, you'll feel a lot of, problems with this if there is issues. Okay, so this is the yoke spring that we just took out there, and all these parts did fall out from the bottom, which was not ideal. However, I thought I'd just go through and name them for you. So we've got the setting lever, we've got the ratchet wheel, we've also got the crown stem, and a few other bits and bobs. Okay, so the keyless works held under tension. You can see this yoke spring just here. Now this will most likely fly as soon as I get this out. It just, yeah, there it is. There it is. Well, that was always going to happen. Okay, so let's take these parts out. So this is the yoke that we're just taking out at the moment. Oh, doesn't want to come out seemingly. Let's get that out of there. Okay, so swiftly moving on, we are now onto the mainspring barrel. So this is the last part to disassemble. This is the heart of the watch, sort of this is where it all starts. And there's a part in the middle there called the barrel arbor, which is what interacts with the mainspring. So let's just take the barrel lid off here and get a look and see what that mainspring's looking like. Okay, it's not looking bad. It looks absolutely fine. And obviously we saw that when the watch was working, just not to a great degree. So we need to take that barrel arbor out of the middle. Oh, there we go, it jumped out. It's rather loose. And that will also be cleaned as well as all the other parts. And we will be getting the mainspring itself out. Now these are very fiddly, and I've said before in my last video and other reels I've done, etc. These will fly. They are very commonly that way inclined. They're very tightly wound, and especially one that's been left for this long, getting out of here is actually almost of a blessing because it's so tightly wound that unlike, the newer watches nowadays, it's not so keen to jump out. There is a method to get these out. Once you take it out, you gently rotate each side with your hands to gently unwind it so it can be removed and cleaned. While all these parts are going to go into the cleaning machine, I just want to advertise and let you know about our website, timepiecedetailing.co.uk. You're more than welcome to access our website, have a look on here. We have an AI tool. We also have parts where you can do your own horology inquests. You can ask us and look at our reviews. And as you can see there, the restoration inquiry, you submit one of those and we straight away see it and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can and let you know all the details so that you can contact us. We are absolutely insured, and we also have a PO box that is able to be used for packages, just so that everyone's clear and everyone knows where they are and it's all tracked and looked after. Okay, so now everything's been cleaned, we are going to start with the reassembly. So we're going to pop this lower centre wheel in first. I have lubricated this, and putting that in there just means we can continue with the build. This is the original lowercase part that you can see. Oh, and there, of course, it jumps away again. We're just going to sit that in there like so. And that should just sit quite flush and perfectly. There we are, perfect. Okay. And this is why there's an order to things. This bridge does actually, is able to actually go on first prior to the mainspring barrel put in. So that is the cannon pinion part we had earlier. So we're just going to push that down to make sure it's seated nicely, which is now. And then we're just going to lubricate that. It needs some of that 8217 to really keep it going. This relies on that and it interacts consistently with the hands and the wheels, and without this lubrication it simply won't just function. Okay, so we're going to put the motion wheels back now and get this all ready. Oh, flies off again. These are really the parts that when I say, the parts that you see that fly away from me, there are so many that do as well. And that's sometimes unable to be caught on camera because I would happily show you numerous times where I have encountered issues with these watches. When taking somebody's watch to sort of complete this sort of work, it's one of those roles where it's hard to give sort of accurate time on how long something will be taken to be completed. And the reason for this is that there's times where we need to order parts, and those parts can be difficult to obtain. I've got to wait for them to arrive, diagnosing. There's loads of different factors to it. Sometimes it'll be really quick and sometimes it can take a while. But again, I think as long as the customer's updated the entire way, there's no problem. And I always try to keep them up to date if I can. Okay, so we're just putting the braking grease into the barrel here, as you can see, and that will allow the mainspring to rotate freely and not cause metal on metal damage that will eventually erode the mainspring over time. And this lubricant is essential, it's imperative for the mainspring to have this. Okay, so the original mainspring we removed did snap. It's very common in these sorts of things. It was obviously on its last legs anyway. So we've just put this new one in here. This is a Zenith mainspring for the 2542 caliber movement. And now we have placed it in ever so nicely. We're going to put this barrel arbor in. This barrel arbor hooks onto the mainspring, and that allows it to be wound through when you'll see it clicks into place. And there we go. The barrel arbor is placed in. So now it's time to just pop the mainspring barrel lid back onto the mainspring. When pushing the barrel back on, you can do it with some set of tweezers, with whatever you'd like. However, I use this tiny little tool that I found on Amazon. I love my tools. I love different things that I can use. I'm a bit of a tool head when it comes to that sort of stuff. And it just allows us to push it on gently. This is some of that 8217 oil I was saying about, and that just goes on the barrel arbor to keep it from grinding away when it does interact with the lid and the rest of the train of wheels. And here we are, here is that tool I was talking about. So we just place it on top of here, obtain the barrel if it doesn't want to run away, and that's the wrong way up, there we go. Gently seat the lid of the barrel on top and push down with our special tool to keep it closed firmly. And this will allow us to then put that back into the movement, knowing that it's safe and it's going to go nowhere. So let's give this a go and put this on now and see if it clicks into place. And there we are. It is on firmly and is good to go back into the movement. Okay, so we're just going to give that little nudge into the correct spot. There we go, and rotate it and see if it... There we go, you can see the other wheel moving as I rotate it there, which means we are doing well so far. So we do have multiple projects ready on the go. This is still an ongoing process, not this exact watch, obviously, but I mean, we've got other movements ready to be serviced and things like that. But we also get requests from people to service their movements and repair their watches. And a lot of customers actually say they'd like their watch to be recorded during servicing. And this is something I'm finding more and more, which I think is fantastic. And, it means they get to see this part that they don't often get to see. So there's some more of that 8217 we're just putting on the train there. We're going to put that straight back in and it should just sit right into place. A lot of places do charge a lot of money for this work. It is time consuming and parts need ordering. And if it doesn't need parts ordering, then it's still, lubrication and parts like that. However, this is my hobby. This is my passion. This is my business. This is what I love to do. And, I left something I wasn't enjoying to come and do something that I'm passionate about. And I think, for that reason, I keep my prices very, very fair. Lower than fair, I would imagine. Or I've been told. But I think that sets a good example. I think people then know I'm serious and I enjoy doing it. Okay, so that is the ratchet wheel now going on top of the mainspring barrel, on top of the bridge, of course. And once again, that will interact with the train of wheels and will work swimmingly. Okay, so these are all the parts in the container that you can see. These are all still to go on. You've got the keyless works, but they've all been cleaned adequately and, they are ready to go back into the movement with lubrication. Okay, this is really starting to come together now. So you can see the escape wheel at the bottom there that's sat nicely. We're just going to put this bridge on to secure the train of wheels. I have tightened the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel back on. And after this, the next part will simply be, the escapement. So when we say about that, we say about the pallet fork, the escape wheel, and then the balance. Okay, so here we have the pallet fork, and we're just going to pop some of that lubricant on there. That is far too much. I will remove that with Wadaco. Oftentimes it's very easy to put too much on, and you don't want too much because, as much as it sounds like a good thing, it actually isn't. And there we go, we're just testing the pallet fork there, make sure it rotates smoothly, which it does. But I often clean all the parts off camera with Wadaco to keep it looking pristine and functioning correctly. Okay, so back over to the dial side of the watch where we've already established the motion works. We will now be moving on to the keyless works. And like I said previously, this is the part where it interacts with the crown stem and you're able to wind the watch. And it is also the part that is held under tension. You have the yoke spring. And on other movements, you have various different parts that also interact with that. So here we have the winding pinion that's just going in there. That should rotate. Oh, stand by. There we are. Oh, it's not the crown stem out. That's convenient. Let me just pick that up. And there we have this little part. Oh, that's gone in sideways. Let's correct that. There we are. So that's sat in there perfectly now. And the crown stem goes through the winding pinion into that little part and then rotates the wheels correctly, which you will see very shortly. When it comes to the keyless works, we use a blue grease known as 9504, and this is for those parts that interact with the other metal. That metal on metal we talk about, the grinding away. You really do want to prevent that, and you will feel it when rotating the watch if it's not done correctly. Now, every stage of this process, I am, cleaning oil off, I am testing parts to make sure they work. It's always involving this sort of trial and error diagnosis pattern that I formally do. So if you sort of see parts and you wonder what that is, feel free to drop a comment and I'll absolutely answer your questions. One of the ways you can see me trying this stuff, as well as cleaning it with Wadaco, as you can see there, is putting the crown stem in and giving it a turn, as you can see. And this just makes sure that everything's interacting correctly, because there could be that a little notch on the winding pinion isn't interacting correctly with another part, and that would therefore cause ultimate issues. So as you can see, this part just falls into place in between that exact part that's right next to the winding pinion, and this is the yoke spring we are now placing in. Yes, this is the volatile one, but we're going to try and get this sat as flush and as neatly as possible. Without this part, the other parts, such as the setting lever and the yoke, won't stay in place, and they will just move around freely inside the watch, and that is why they do need the yoke spring that's going to provide that tension to prevent that happening. So we should be able to just, yes, there we go, perfect. And a little adjustment to make sure it's seated in there correctly. There we are. Perfect. You may also notice that there is a little notch on top of the setting lever, and that gets pushed against the setting lever spring, which we're placing right here. And it has a sort of indentation in the arm, and that will push against it. You'll see we'll get it lined up here in a second. Okay, so let's tighten this down. And there we are. You can see it's actually tensioned up against the setting lever, and that allows it to wind perfectly and click in and out like so. Okay, now for the part that really is important, the balance. That's going to go back in there, and this will determine how well we have done. The balance won't kick up straight away purely because this is a manual wound watch, and prior to all this, we made sure there was no power in the mainspring and in the barrel and in any of the watch for that regard. The next step is focusing on this cap jewel here. Now these need cleaning, they need lubrication, and this is an important part. So this gold outer part you can see outside the cap is the shock protection. Now this is known as the Inca block shock protection, this exact setup, and it just pops out like so, and that will allow us to get to this cap jewel. It was quite common back in the day for them not to have shock protections, but most watches now do. And you can see this is a high quality movement back from those sort of times because it does have that shock protection. So if it is dropped, the watch is looked after. And there you can see it just popped right open, and now we have access to that cap jewel, which we will be taking out of there, cleaning, oiling, and replacing. Okay, so this is the cap jewel isolated by itself. You can see it is tiny, it makes my tweezers look large. And the only way to really separate this cap jewel is to put it in a solvent named One Dip. And this will separate the actual cap from the jewel, which I will manage to show you here. You should see it separate any moment now. There we go, you can see the separating. And this One Dip cleans it, and once dry we are able to place this 9010 Mobius on that jewel, and then place them back together like so, ready to go back into the movement. Okay, so I'm placing the dial back on now. I did try to clean it, but ultimately that corrosion is too deep, and any further attempt at cleaning would just damage the dial, and I'm not willing to do that. So for that reason, a collector will enjoy that and understand that this is how the watch has been, and that's its history. Its scars are its history. And I think that's like similar to us, isn't it? The stuff we go through is our history, and if it was erased, then we wouldn't be who we are today. And this watch certainly wouldn't be where it is today either. Okay, and there we go. We have the hands back on. We're just going to pop the case on there. Wow, that is stunning. And let's just see the watch working and the balance moving. That's one of the most important parts you want to see. That should be kicking up now when we put some wind in it here. Once we put the crown stem in place and give it some wind. And there you can see the balance spinning, which is fantastic. And after some minor adjustments, we have it pretty much close enough and looking good, in good condition, and this is it on the strap. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I am continuously working on more. This watch will be available for you to purchase if you would like so. Thank you for joining me for the journey, and thank you for helping me give this watch a second time around. Take care.